Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is definitely going to be on my ATP Geopolitics channel, so whoop, whoop, whoop. Welcome. If you've not been here already, I have had the UK intelligence services get involved here, and my internet is back up. They've overcome Putin's attempts to cancel me, to shut me out of this whole thing. So take that, Putin. I've got my internet back. So I will be able to do a Ukraine War Update extra video. And this is it. So where should we start today to give you those extra nuggets and tidbits to get you juicy, to get your teeth into, to give you a greater understanding of this whole conflict? Well, let's go to this guy. I've missed off the beginning bit where you see the dead guy that he's got this medical kit off. But this is interesting. And again, as ever, I'll read out what he says. There'll be people who are listening to this rather than watching it. And I'll read out what this guy says. So he's looking at a med kit that has been taken off a dead, mobilized conscript Russian soldier. And he says, as a matter of fact, the med kit resembles something that looks like an Israeli bandage. But it's not an Israeli bandage. It's not an Israeli bandage. This rubber band, not a tourniquet, a band, like in 1941. So the idea here is a proper tourniquet. They've come on since that's old school rubber band. Looks like it's come out of the war from 1941. And a booklet with various advice. Help yourself. Yes. So that's how to help yourself when you get injured, obviously. And that's that. So as he looks inside the med kit, he's looking at the label that is sort of sewn into the inside of the med kit, and he reads out the label. I'd like to focus your attention that this batch, this is what the label says, some producer, St. Petersburg, 2022. And he shows it to the camera, which is quite incredible. So the medkits were specifically produced for the mobilized, and they are this bad. Mobics, rejoice, he says. Which I think is incredible. So what this guy is saying is that here's a medkit that has just been produced. It's just been manufactured in St. Petersburg, 2022. This isn't like something from the old storerooms from 30, 40, 50 years ago. This is a brand new medkit, and it's got absolute rubbish inside it, or it's just not fit for purpose. And obviously the Ukrainians are used to having better medkits. So he's pretty amazed by the fact that this is what they are giving their mobilized soldiers. So it's just an interesting insight into that. Okay, talking about Russia, apparently only 14 brands out of 60 car manufacturers will remain on the Russian car market by the end of 2022, and that's the Association of Russian Automobile Dealers. It's reported that these 11 will be Chinese and domestic Lada, GSZ, UAZ. So you will only have sort of Chinese and Russian car manufacturers having their cars on a Russian car market, as everyone else has pulled out. You're unable to sort of buy parts. There was talk actually quite early on in the conflict and early on in the sanctions that Russian cars were unable to be made with working airbags because the components for the airbags, like the chips that run the airbags, they just couldn't get hold of them. So the brand new cars that you buy are not quite what they seem. Here is, and there's so much of this going on at the moment. This is really good. This is a rich time, a fertile. This is sort of fertile ground for designing and creating drones. And the Ukrainians have realized how incredibly important drones have been for the Russians, that they are now coming back at the Russians with their own drones, and they've been developing these in apparently super quick time. Since the beginning of the war. So here, Kharkiv engineers have developed a new drone practically invisible to radar and well protected from electronic warfare, with a flight range of up to 150 kilometers and an operating altitude of 800 to 1,000 meters. The AFU has already tested it by conducting reconnaissance in the enemy rear. And here's a bit of footage of this very drone. He's pulling it back, seems to be launched by some kind of elastic launch mechanism that as it's getting pulled back by the elastic, the propellers kick in and it sort of takes off. And these are going to be so important. So that looks like just a basic reconnaissance drone, but I imagine the idea is that it's got really high altitude. It can't be picked up by radar, and it goes 150 kilometers. And by the looks of it, that ain't going to cost a lot of money to make. In other words, what they're doing is they're looking at the Orlan 10, the Orlan 30 drones, but the Orlan 10 particularly, as these cheap and cheerful, made with water bottles to hold the petrol, just a DSLR Canon camera glued in, taped into it, with the on button switch, pressed down so it doesn't automatically turn itself off. And then they whack those into the air, and they're causing havoc amongst the Ukrainians. So that's interesting development there for the Ukrainians. Good stuff. So next, we have an interest. I mean, this is going to be such a big topic. It already is a big topic for certain analysts. This is one of the most insidious and terrible aspects of the war. The filtration camps of, I don't know how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more Ukrainians have been filtered through filtration camps and disappeared into Russia and other areas. In this video, it talks about children being filtered from the Donbass into Chechnya. And as the old Jesuit priest said, give me a boy at age 7 and I'll give you a man, or whatever it was. The idea is that I can mold this person, this young person, to become whatever I want them to become. This is the incredible potency of this kind of, I guess it's propaganda that's being filled into them, but this is brainwashing. And you will have children who are just brainwashed to become, children of Russia. It's really terribly sad. I'll read out the subtitles and whatnot from this for people who are listening. Children from occupied parts of Ukraine taken to camp in Chechnya for military patriotic training. So here the children are jumping over sort of assault courses and whatnot. These images were posted by Ruspitsnaz, a Chechen special forces academy. So these kids are going into a sort of Chechen, or are being associated with the Chechen Special Forces Academy. The youths are deemed socially troubled and in need of re-education. This is something we heard with some of the Russian propagandists on national television. We've had, I showed you some of the translated shows that have been translated of them talking about how they should take troubled individuals and throw them into the front line and that sort them out. That'll turn them into, these troubled kids, turn them into men and cure all their problems, if you like. I mean, there might be an element of that. I'm not denying that kind of tough love might be beneficial for them in some way, but you're essentially sending someone to be killed, a high probability of being killed. I'm not sure that's the most morally, progressive thing to do. But anyway, let's carry on. So these guys are shooting, or they're looking at people shooting. There are 45 Ukrainian youths from the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. So this is a quote from the Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights. So this is a woman who has been sanctioned. This is not a good woman, or at least she's doing exactly what Putin wants. Whether she's pressured to do so, I don't know. Maria Lvova-Belova. Children from these areas are very important for us because at the moment there are no educational organizations or social institutions in these regions. Well, I'm going to interrupt here. Do you know why there are no social institutions in those regions? Because you've invaded it since 2014. You're the ones that's been in charge of those annexed regions, right? Why are there no social institutions to support troubled children? Because you're the ones that have been in charge of that area. I wonder if such institutions are in Lviv. If they are in Lviv, you can take a running jump. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And if you're talking about areas of Luhansk and Donetsk that you've since occupied, then you've just invaded a place. No wonder there's going to be troubled children hanging around. Their fathers might have been killed or sent off for either side. Just absolutely, just winds me up, this kind of I don't know, anything that involves indoctrination for me of children really, really gets my goat, because you are basically manipulating and exploiting someone's mind that is not old enough, mature enough, and worldly enough to think and act for themselves, and is vulnerable, and that is despicable. I hate it. Hate it. Sorry, rant mode. She continues. For us, it is important to work with people with this group of 45 children and then to continue working with them when they go back home. Lvova Belova is on the US sanctions list for managing the deportation of thousands of Ukrainian children to Russia. And here are these children getting off a train, as well as for organising forced adoptions and re-education. They are 16 or 17 years old today, says the narrator. So in a year or two, they could theoretically go to war as volunteers. This is a human rights activist, Abu Bakr Yungabayev. Meanwhile, they receive military training. This is basically a children's army. Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov was also involved in organising the camp. What a surprise. What a collection of beautiful people. It's never been a secret. He has been proud and open about it. It is not only about physical, but also ideological training. Children were taken from Ukraine to be taught to hate Ukrainians. Paramilitary children's camps have existed in Chechnya since 2017. There are now plans to open 10 more camps in various other Russian regions. Just an absolute shocker. Really annoys me, that. Really annoys me. And yeah, I mean, it's very effective. It's like, how do you change hearts and minds? You've got a population of people that you've come and occupied the country, right? You've taken over. Let's, just imagine a scenario. So I'm an aggressive, oppressive army from a neighboring country. I've come and taken over your country, right? All the adults in that country are going to hate us, right, for being the oppressors and aggressors. But we take the children out before they've really kind of developed these ideas and understood what's going on. We take them out, put them in different families, put them in new communities, and indoctrinate them over a course of 10 years or however long, and then send them back into that country. Then suddenly they've got this new and younger generation who is sympathetic to the oppressors, to the aggressors. And that is how you win hearts and minds. You don't necessarily win them, you steal them and warp them. And that is the insidious nature of this form of ideological indoctrination, and I bloody hate it. So from one ideological indoctrination to another, I know this is going to annoy some of you. Some of you will be big fans of Tucker Carlson. Who's Tucker Carlson? I've got an international audience here. Some of you might not know. So it's a TV, a news channel called Fox News in America, owned by Rupert Murdoch, and his channel has kind of represented the voice of the right, and basically is a kind of arm, I suppose, for the GOP, the Republican Party, in the same way that you could argue MSNBC is the arm for the Democrats. But Fox News is very pro-Republican. But of course, as I've said before, there are many different flavors of republicanism and conservatism in America. And you will, as my viewers, represent that to some degree, those of you who are conservative. Now, Tucker Carlson is a highly controversial opinion maker. So he's not really a news anchor or anything. He has an opinion show. And the thing with a lot of Fox News, and this is actually news in general, is that you're starting to get like infotainment, which is like information that is warped in such a way that it becomes entertainment, and you're hearing things that get you really angry, or they're triggering things in you because you're being manipulated by what you're watching, and that will happen on both sides, no doubt. Tucker Carlson is absolutely, he's one of the best at this. I'd say that's best at a bad thing. But he represents very much the position that I've talked to you about Marjorie Taylor Greene representing, which is this kind of MAGA republicanism that is he is deeply anti Ukraine and pro Putin. I just don't know how he can be. I don't know what his agenda is here. I have a feeling he might quite like authoritarian leaders. That's why he quite like Trump and that kind of stuff. But B, probably likes anyone that Biden and the American Democratic government hate. So if they hate, if the ruling administration in America at the moment, Biden's administration, likes Zelensky, right? Then Tucker Carlson is going to hate Zelensky. And so he's just like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. So maybe there's an element of that. Anyway, like if you are a fan of Tucker Carlson or have been previously, just be really, and you are really pro Ukraine. So if you fit into and I know some of you are, into the Republican camp, but are pro Ukraine and anti Putin, then just listen to this and be really wary. So Tucker Carlson says here, Zelensky is far closer to Lenin than to George Washington. He's a dictator, a dangerous authoritarian who has $100 billion in US tax dollars to erect a one-party police state in Ukraine. So this is...
Well, the better part of a year later, it's getting harder and harder to believe any of this. Whatever you think of the war in Ukraine, it is pretty clear that Zelensky has no interest in freedom and democracy. In fact, Zelensky is far closer to Lenin than to George Washington. He is a dictator. He is a dangerous authoritarian who has used $100 billion in U.S. tax dollars to erect a one-party police state in Ukraine. And that's not an overstatement. Over the past year, Zelensky has banned opposition parties. He shut down critical media by force. He's arrested his political opponents. He has sent soldiers into churches. Well, the better...
And so actually there are elements of what Tucker Carlson says here that are correct. But what Tucker Carlson absolutely 100% fails to understand here is that Ukraine is at war. And when you're on a war footing, when you are a wartime leader, democracy is not so easy to uphold. You need to be able to A, make decisions really quickly, and B, you need to be able to squash dissent, because dissent can be really, really dangerous. So if you're trying to take everything to a vote to get stuff done when you're literally at war right throughout your country, and there are some pro-Russian players in parliament and people who don't like you as a leader, then you end up not being able to pass sort of policy or rules and regulations, and you get stuck in the quagmire of democracy, which in peacetime is like, that's great, and that's what democracy is, and okay, let's work this out. But in wartime, it's really dangerous to have to go through that kind of very slow process. So he has done some of the things Tucker Carlson says, but Tucker Carlson's been really, really simplistic here and needs to understand that, Zelensky and Ukraine are at war. And when you are at war with Russia, and you've got pro-Russian politicians acting in your parliaments, that is really, really controversial. So imagine like Carlson talking about, I don't know, war in World War II, right? And the American Parliament are trying to make some decisions, and they have either some like Nazi party members in the Senate or in Congress, or they have, I don't know, Japanese imperialistic, uh, pro Japan party members there. Imagine the issues that would represent, right? And America would no doubt have sorted something out that we're at war. We can't really have your opinions. I know in a normal functioning democracy, we need to hear all opinions and represent all of you. But this is actually a really dangerous scenario. And there's an interesting debate to be had around this. But I think what Carlson is doing here is warping reality to fit to his own agenda, which is we shouldn't be giving so much money to Ukraine, and we should be broadly pro Putin. I mean, Carlson has, to give him his dues, he's been pro Putin since the beginning of this war and hasn't really wavered, even when he said absolutely outrageous things in the past, during this conflict, and come out looking absolutely foolish. Here, I don't think he's doing himself any favors, but he's playing to a certain audience who will be nodding their heads. And someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, who might be watching this, would be thinking, "Yes, Tucker, you're our man." But I just think this is really dangerous and it's divisive, and it is. I don't think it's welcome at all. But I'd be interested to see what you think. Okay, so let's finally get on to talking about the oil cap. So the price cap policy on Russian oil can work only if lowered to $35 instead of $60. This is a comfortable level of price restrictions for Russia, which will minimally affect its oil revenues and ability to finance war, Ukraine's Minister of Economy said. So I'm going to explain the oil cap to you. We'll have a little chat about that. And when I say chat, it'll be me talking, obs. And this is Ukraine talking about how they think the price cap is too high. $60 a barrel is too high. It should be something like 35. This is similar to what Poland and the Nordic states were saying. They wanted, or sorry, the Baltic states, they wanted a lower price cap. And then within Europe, you have competing entities. So Greece, Malta, and Cyprus, who have big shipping industries and also close ties with Russia, wanted a higher price cap. And so it's met in a fairly reasonable middle ground, I suppose. But anyway, let's. When this price cap came into play a few days back, I think last week it was, or at least maybe the beginning of this week, the Ukraine the Latest podcast ran a little segment on it to explain it, and I think it's worth listening to that. It's a good explainer. Just a couple of minutes of this.
Hi, David. Well, there's actually two things that happened today. But yes, as you mentioned, a price cap that has been agreed by the G7 plus Australia. So the G7 is the UK, so it's us, the US, Canada, Italy, Germany, France, and Japan have agreed on a $60 per barrel limit on the price at which Russian oil can be traded outside the bloc. So bearing in mind, today, I looked just before I entered this room, crude oil is currently traded at $87 a barrel on financial markets. So they're trying to cap it well below that price. And your next question is probably, well, how are they going to do that? Because when governments in general try to control prices, it usually ends badly. So they're not planning to flood the market with oil to try and increase supply to bring the price down. What they're doing is using an advantage they have, because most of the oil that is shipped around the world, it needs to be insured. So when I send something from A to B, because it's oil, some of it might fall off into the sea, you might lose some of it, or even worse, it might cause an environmental disaster if, say, there's an oil spillage. So you have to get that those containers insured, and the EU, mostly via Lloyd's of London in London, or there's a club that's based in London at least, does this insurance. And what it's saying is to these companies, and they're trying to stop shipping companies from handling Russian oil unless the price tag is $60 a barrel or below. So they're telling these companies that do these insurance contracts, the companies that ship this oil around the world, when this oil comes to you and the Russian company, etc., says, I want to send this to X country abroad, unless this oil is priced at $60 a barrel or below, you can't deal with it. And so that comes into effect today. Oil prices are up slightly off the back of it. It's too early to say what the immediate impact is. But, the idea is, since the start of the war, Western governments want to inflict maximum pain on Russia by hitting the Kremlin's wallet where it's hardest from oil revenues. But it also wants to minimize the hit to consumers. We've already seen here in the UK, our energy bills, we're all thinking twice, do we crank up the heating? Can we afford it? Energy bills have shot up here in the UK and across Europe. But so they want to minimize the hit to consumers. The price of inflicting maximum pain on Russia.
So do we think it's going to work? And when we were chatting before this, you mentioned that there might be some loopholes, there might be ways of getting around this. Could you talk?
Actually, so I'll come back to that because I think that's a really interesting thing. Let's just talk a little bit about economics. Let's talk a little bit about how the price cap will work. So first of all, a couple of real basics, just to talk about how the fundamentals of economics really works. So you have supply and demand. Let's talk about widgets. I mean, it could be anything. Widgets, good, sort of neutral thing. Right? If the price of widgets is really high, so we look up the y-axis here, the price is really high, then it means that you're going to have very low demand. If something's really, really expensive, very few people are going to buy it because you have to have a lot of money to be be able to afford this particular thing, and you might not think it has that value. So as the price comes down, it turns out it's a downward sloping demand curve. As the price of something goes down, people demand more and more of it. If the widgets are half the price, you'll be demanding twice as much of it, type thing. And that's how the demand curve works. The supply curve works in the other direction. So when we look at the supply curve, this goes in the other direction. So when the price is really high, people are incentivized, producers are incentivized to produce lots of them because they're thinking, hey, we're going to sell loads of these at a really high price. The problem is that floods the market. And that difference between supply and demand will then depress the price of the widgets here, because there are too many widgets on the market. So you're having to sell them cheaply to try and offload them. And that then drives up demand because the price comes down. So eventually, as you get this kind of, the producer and the consumer involved in this, in the free market project here, eventually you come to some kind of equilibrium in the middle where supply meets demand, and there is, everyone's happy that they're paying generally the right price for the good or whatever. And of course, this whole system can be manipulated. You can try and only produce a certain. So oil is a great example of this. OPEC will hold oil back so that the price goes up, but they're just making just as much money, and in fact they're producing less stuff. So it's kind of win-win. No matter what the situation is, as long as there's demand for oil, then oil producers are going to be pretty happy. And that's how supply and demand works. But if you have, so say oil at the moment in the world, you have a certain amount of oil that is being pumped out, and that has given us this equilibrium price. What people like OPEC do very, often or occasionally or at certain times is they stop pumping so much oil because they want the price to go up. So the supply goes down, which means the price goes up as everyone's fighting over the same amount of oil. So people are willing to pay more for that oil. And in those situations, the poor countries, do worse because they can't compete with the richer countries. And it's the same with food, same with everything. So, but when you can control the production of something in that very strategic way, that particularly works with like cartels and oligopolies. This is evident in these fossil fuel industries, these natural resource industries, gas and oil, and so on and so forth. Well, you've got a certain amount of oil in that's being produced, and a big proportion of that is Russian oil. But the thing is that Russia's making an absolute packing of money off that oil, and we're all demanding it. Europe's demanding it, and the developed world is to some degree demanding this Russian oil. We're like, right, okay, we don't want you to make loads of money off that oil. What do we do about that? And one way of doing something about that is to just flood the market with more and more oil. So this is a way that governments can strategically try and influence the price of any kind of good. So in America, Joe Biden's got strategic reserves of oil that he can release that then flood the market. This is what happened when OPEC decided to produce less, and this sided with Putin by the seams of it. A couple of weeks back, months back, or whatever. They started producing less oil in the Middle East, and that made everyone sort of demand more and more. Everyone's demanding those limited pools of oil around the world, which meant that the Russian oil then could command a higher price, even though it was kind of sanctioned and it was illegal for some people to buy it, and all this kind of stuff. So it's all kind of confusing. There's loads of variables going on. But that is one way you can try and influence the price of a good, is by flooding the market with more and more of it. But the issue, that for some people that's seen as, some people argue that that's actually what we should have done a lot more, is leave it up to the free market to decide. If we flood the world with loads and loads of oil, the price of that oil would drop, and then Russia just won't make as much oil. But then it depends on everyone working together to do that. OPEC, America, all the oil producers of the world, Venezuela, etc., and it's quite difficult maybe to achieve. So the other way is to do this price cap that you've just had explained to you by Ukraine the latest. Let's have a look at the Vox article that sort of goes into this a little bit as well. This is a Vox article called What to Know About the $60 Price Cap, the Plan to Limit Russia's Oil Revenues. The effectiveness and implementation of a price cap like this are untested. The EU ban will cover all seaborne, about 90% of EU Russian oil imports, although an exemption remains for pipeline gas. The United States and other countries already banned the import of Russian oil, but that didn't have much impact because they didn't actually buy as much as Europe. But the EU embargo would have also prevented operators from insuring ships carrying Russian crude. That could throw the global oil market out of whack by taking a lot of Russian oil off the market and spiking prices. Again, supply goes down, price goes up. This would put a lot of pressure on poorer countries that just couldn't compete, exacerbating global food and fuel crises. It would also likely increase profits for the Kremlin since they'd make more money on the oil they could still sell to willing buyers. Enter the price cap. With this, European firms and any of those within the price cap coalition, the group of 7 plus Australia, G7 plus Australia, can continue to finance, insure, transport, and broker ships that carry Russian oil as long as it's happening at the agreed upon $60 price cap. So this is using the fact that actually there's a near monopoly on maritime insurance with Lloyd's of London and other insurance providers, but broadly in the same sort of geographical area. That control the insurance of the maritime trade. And if you can get them on side and say, right, you won't insure any Russian vessels or any vessels carrying Russian oil unless the price for that oil is at $60 $60 per barrel, so on and so forth. So it's using the advantage, as Ukraine later said. Any country that wants to pay more for Russian oil can't use operators or insurers from this coalition, which is a big share of the market. Right now, Russia has said that it will not abide by the price cap, even if it means cutting production. But if the price cap works as it should, the increased costs and inefficiencies of trying to work around it will dissuade buyers from doing so. And for Russia's most important clients like China, Turkey, and India, the price cap could serve as a negotiating tool so they continue to buy Russian oil on the cheap. Of course, this is if it all goes according to plan. There already are caveats. Though Russia isn't exactly going to be transparent about this, the $60 price cap appears to be about what Russia is already selling its oil for. I mean, it's a bit up and down at the moment, it's a bit higher than that, which means Russia's oil revenues are likely to nosedive immediately. Some countries like Poland pushed for a much lower cap, and Ukraine has also said it doesn't go far enough, as discussed. There are also some questions around enforcement, as shippers have to attest that they are abiding by the price cap, and negotiators end up weakening some of the penalties for violators. Interestingly, there's a big traffic jam of ships in the Black Sea because Turkey at the Bosphorus Straits are actually being really tight on this, and that seems to be really good. That's really positive for this approach to sanctioning Russia here, to price capping their oil. Those Russian oil ships coming out the Black Sea have to show that they've got the right documentation to the Turkish, or the Turkish won't let them through, and they are being tight, and that's really, really positive. But the US and its allies were trying to strike a balance through a mechanism that hasn't been attempted before. They wanted to avoid completely disrupting global oil markets while applying more pressure to Russia's oil profits. The cap is not firmly set and is subject to review every 2 months. That means it and its enforcement mechanisms are likely to be tinkered with depending on how this plays out. So there you go. It's interesting. Let's go back to how Russia might be able to get around this, or how sort of buyers of Russian oil might be able to get around this.
Goes through that.
Yeah, well, as with everything, a lot of this, when you have these international agreements, there's a lot of bargaining going on, a lot of horse trading. You know, this $60 a barrel limit, this figure was come upon after months of negotiations. On the one hand, you have countries like Poland, Estonia, Lithuania saying, look, the price, it's too high. The cost of Russia getting it out of the ground, putting it in a barrel, sending it somewhere is about $20 a barrel. So Russia is still going to be making money out of this. And if the idea is to minimize the Kremlin's revenues from oil, I mean, it's doing that to some extent, but Russia is still making money. And because of the huge jump in the...
This is true. Of course, they'll still be making money on $60 a barrel, but the idea is that they would have budgeted for, they would be used to getting in much more than $60 a barrel. And when they suddenly don't have that and they can't get that from international sales, and also people like China and India will know that the price cap is there, and they will be going to Russia and saying, yeah, $60, eh? How about we pay? Yeah, we'll pay $60 as well. And then Russia will be in no position to really bargain because they need to sell their oil. They've got to sell it to someone. And actually, this plays with the whole market and allows other buyers to come in and jump on the bandwagon of the sanctions or the price cap. And it's not so much that these other countries are advocating the price cap, but they'll be like, yeah, they'll be rubbing their hands together in glee because they get a much better deal on oil than they otherwise would have done. So there's lots of ramifications to this potentially.
The oil price this year, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, is actually going to be making more money from oil this year than it did last year. But then on the other hand, you had countries in the EU like Malta, Cyprus, Greece. They have huge shipping industries saying, hey, this is a big part of our economy. You need to actually price it a little bit higher. It needs to be higher than $60 a barrel so that we don't get hurt disproportionately from this deal. So I think America played a big role in trying to broker this. They've come to this $60 per barrel limit. I mean, again, this is the first day we've seen prices rise slightly. Russia, a spokesman today said, we will retaliate. They didn't specify how. I'm not sure how they would, but they also said that it wouldn't stop its military campaign either. In terms of loopholes, yeah, there are potentially a lot of loopholes. I mean, this is a supply chain. You know, you have a Russian company, it comes out of Russia, it goes through a shipping company. They all have to certify what the price is. And, you know, there could be records, there's a risk that records could be falsified by Russia and trading partners who want to keep that oil flowing. The Kremlin said it won't sell to countries that comply with this price mechanism. So, you know, there are, you know, potentially ways that countries could find ways around it. I was looking through the history books before I came and sat down here. You know, a similar thing happened when the UN during the 1990s tried to do something, a similar plan in Iraq. There's this famous All for Food program, and lots of countries overpaid for other commodities such as wheat. You know, the thing with money is that it's fungible. So you can say, yes, I'm paying this for wheat when I'm actually paying a little bit more for oil. And who can prove it? And
that's a really good point. So there might be sort of deals done with people that say, okay, we're going to pay $60 for a barrel for this oil, but actually we're going to pay more because, you know, we're doing some sort of dodgy agreement with you, so we get lots of this oil, and we're going to pay more for this wheat that we're buying off you as well, which isn't capped, and so on and so forth. So they also have, you know, different these tankers out to sea that are moving oil from one tanker to the other, and then it's like not the provenance of that oil is somewhat murky, and so on and so forth. There are lots of loopholes. It's not going to be easy, that's for sure, but you know, it is open to be reviewed, and hopefully will dent Russia's economic prospects going forward. And yeah, we'll just have to see how it works. Hopefully that kind of gives you some introduction to the price cap and to the economics involved with it. Let me know what else you might want to know in the comments below. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hope that was of interest and of use to you. Please continue to like, subscribe, and share these videos and support the channels in all the ways you do. If you want to grab any of my books, these are the books under the name Johnny Pierce. That's where I write my fiction and other sort of stuff. There's a book if you've got twins. I wrote a book on how to be, advice for dads of twins. Twins: A Survival Guide for Dads. Family book of the family book of the word of the day for a year, every year forever. So if you're interested in words and whatnot, that's a nice book. Dystopian horror series, My Survival of the Fittest. Lots of nice reviews for that. And Curse of the Maya. Again, a series, this one with a sequel, Grease Lightning. That's an ongoing series. Both of these are ongoing series. Please check them out, see if you like them. And that helps me out in different ways and gives you something to read. Anyway, thank you. You're amazing. Cheers. Take care. Goodbye.